All right, we are live. I think it's worth getting started. Thank you everyone who has joined us today. We're gonna have some people trickling in, I can tell, because it's a Thursday. We're all trickling in whatever way that may mean. But my name is Alex Friedman. I'm the acting planning manager for the city of Takoma Park, and I am really excited to have this presentation tonight. It is going to be in two parts. Part one is going to be focused on the New Ave Bikeway Section D, or as I'm trying to rebrand it, the District Connector. It is going to be a conversation with our planning team about the preliminary draft designs for that connection, which would take the designs already nearly completed for the New Ave Bikeway that end at Poplar Avenue in New Hampshire and connect them to the existing bike infrastructure in DC at Kansas Lane / Kansas Avenue, northeast or northwest. Then in the second half of this presentation, we're going to be talking about the Metropolitan Branch Trail upgrade. Both of these design processes are funded by a technical assistance grant through the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. And we are just super excited. So as a reminder, before I hand it over to our consultant team, for those who are just joining us, to be able to hear everything properly, you're going to need to select your interpretation language, even if that's English. There's a little globe icon at the bottom, and that way you'll be able to hear everything. So without further ado, I would love to hand this over to Rob and Andrew from RK&K. I will let them take it from here. Thank you, gentlemen.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Good evening, everyone. I'm Rob Gillespie with RK&K, consultant project manager, and I'll be presenting this evening with the lead engineer, Andrew Aguilar, the City of Takoma Park's draft 30% plans for the New Ave Bikeway Section D District Connector project. So preliminary design, as Alex mentioned, is funded through an MWCOG Transportation Land Use Connections Grant. And the project goals, the next slide. Project goals are development of a low stress, safe and enjoyable bikeway. Section D would complete the city's southernmost bikeway connection to DC. It would implement the improvements while avoiding impacts to property, environmental resources, and utilities. We would also identify stormwater management requirements associated with the improvements. Our 30% design approach is to utilize low-speed, low-volume neighborhood streets. And our key facility types for this section of the bikeway include sharrows or shared lanes with appropriate pavement markings and bike route and wayfinding signs. We're also proposing shared use path where city right-of-way is available. So city planning and public works staff, along with RK&K, conducted site visits to evaluate two potential routes. And we selected a preferred route for survey and engineering, preliminary engineering. Project stakeholders include City of Takoma Park, the community, of course, Montgomery Planning, and utility owners. So, and again, as Alex had mentioned, as a frame of reference, the design team is completing construction documents for both the New Ave Bikeway sections A and B. And that, again, that extends along the southbound side of New Hampshire Avenue from Holton Lane south to Poplar Avenue. It's about 1.2 miles for sections A and B. So tonight we're talking about section D this evening, and those limits are extending for approximately a half mile from Poplar Avenue to the DC line. Where it connects to Kansas Avenue Northeast, where it would connect to existing on-street bike lanes into DC. So as I mentioned, city planning and public works staff, along with RK&K, assessed two potential routes or alignments. Alignment one starts at Poplar Avenue, which again is the southern limit of section B. It extends west along Poplar Avenue, south along 4th Avenue, west along Westmoreland, and then south along Kansas Lane to the DC line. Alignment 2 continues along southbound New Hampshire Avenue, south of Poplar Avenue for about 350 feet, where it borders the Sligo Mill Conservation Area, and it extends behind the Takoma Tire and Auto Shop on southbound 650, where it extends to the current dead end of Sligo Mill Road. It would continue along Sligo Mill Road and then head north to an existing through an existing paper street, if you will, which is an extension of Westmoreland Avenue. Then it would connect to Kansas Lane and to the DC line at Eastern. Now, alignment 2 requires impacts to the Takoma Branch, Stream Valley, and the Sligo Mill Conservation Area. And it would also require narrowing of southbound Maryland 650 travel lanes just to implement an 8-foot wide shared use path with a 1 to 2 foot buffer for about 350 feet again. And that would require costly retaining walls and utility relocations. For these reasons, the design team selected alignment 1 for preliminary design. So the good news is that we are not proposing any impacts to right-of-way or street parking on the draft plans for section D. There's 2 utility pole impacts that we identified that would need to be relocated to install an effective shared use path. That's on Poplar Avenue and a wider sidewalk refuge for the school bus stop at the southwest corner of Westmoreland Ave and Kansas Lane. And we'll get into those details. I'm going to have Andrew drive us through the plans here shortly and spell those locations out. So to quickly summarize our steps completed and where we're headed, the design team performed field visits to review a selected preferred alignment for the preliminary design. A public informational field walk, Alex led that with the community last December. Comments were collected and considered for preparation of these 30% draft plans. We'll collect additional community comments received tonight and subsequent this meeting for consideration in finalizing the 30% design. Our 30% design scope will conclude with a presentation to City Council in May. So again, to reiterate those next steps, we're going to collect comments from the community this evening, and subsequent to the meeting, there'll be opportunities to, provide your comments after the meeting, as again, this will be recorded. And then we'll compile those, consider them with the city and other stakeholders, and we'll finalize the 30% design and conclude with a presentation to City Council. So additional funding will also be pursued by the city to complete semi-final and final designs that may include the MDOT Bikeways program, similar to what the city secured for sections A and B. So I'd like to turn it over now to Andrew to walk us through the 30% plans, and then we'll conclude with Q&A.
Good evening, Takoma community. I'm excited to show you all the plans. I'll be focusing on showing everything in plan view and giving you an idea from block to block what improvements we're proposing. I'm going to start on the Eastern Avenue segment, Kansas Lane. So the project starts at Eastern Avenue, and the segment from Eastern Avenue to Westmoreland Avenue, we're proposing sharrows, and this is a method. This is a bike route, as Rob described earlier. This is a method that's used for bicycle facilities to show the road, to show drivers that the road should be shared between bicyclists and drivers. So we're proposing sharrows along this segment of the corridor, and also through here we propose to improve the sidewalk. From our field visits and research, we found that the sidewalk was only 2 feet. So we're proposing along this segment to put in a full 5 foot sidewalk. This is one of the utility impacts Rob was describing, is that we will need to relocate a utility pole at the corner to provide at least 3 feet of clearance. From here, the alignment continues. We have bicycle signage and route signage to show bicyclists how to navigate through this corridor and understand when to turn. So the bicycle facility continues down Westmoreland Avenue. And as I go through the sheets, I'm just continuing on the next sheet. It's a match line. So for example, here it says HDO2. So from here, I'll move to the next sheet and it'll line up right where this line is showing. There's a total of 5 plan sheets. So from here, from Westmoreland Avenue, we continue to show share markings and bicycle signage. And along 4th Avenue, we're proposing share markings and bicycle signage. And then along 4th Avenue, we're also going to have some signage in between. So bicyclists, sometimes when you go a couple of blocks and you don't see any signage, we're going to add a couple of signs midway to let bicyclists know that they're still on the designated bicycle route. And then the project continues along 4th Avenue with the share markings and bicycle signage. And when we get to Poplar Avenue, we're proposing a shared use path. One thing about this segment of the project is that we found that the curb lines weren't actually parallel. So we could actually fit in this 8-foot shared use path and rearrange this curb line and still maintain the same traffic pattern. So even though we're widening this curb a little bit, the traffic still operates as it does. It will still operate as it does today. And we're proposing the shared use path from 4th Avenue, and then we'll continue along Poplar Avenue, past Good Avenue, and then the shared use path will continue to New Hampshire where it will terminate. And this is where it will tie into the proposed improvements for the New Ave section bikeway. And this is where the other utility impact that Rob was referring to as a presentation, where we will need to relocate another utility pole. From there, I will hand it back over to Rob.
So, thanks, Andrew. So I think at this point, we'd like to open it up to Q&A. We encourage your comments and questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rob. Also, to ask questions, people can raise their hand using the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. When you raise your hand, I'll unmute you so that you can ask your question. Or you can drop it in the chat, which I think everyone should have access to. I have a question in the chat from Walter Mulberry, and it is, what are the elevation changes on the route? And that's actually something that, Rob, I don't know if you have an answer for that. I have an answer that I calculated this afternoon for that in anticipation of this question.
Go ahead. I'm happy to chime in if you need to. Yep.
So from the corner, so the common route is for all of the options are Poplar Avenue, sort of the mainstay. So I started my calculations from the corner of 4th and Poplar, and that's where a bunch of different options diverge. So if you were to continue up Poplar to Circle, turn left down Circle, follow that across to Kansas Lane over to Eastern, that has about 66 feet in elevation gain and 52 feet in elevation decrease. If you were to go from Poplar down 4th, turn right on Cockerell and then left on Kansas, that's 49 feet of elevation gain and 36 feet of elevation decrease. If you were to keep going down 4th and turn up Allegheny instead, that's 39 feet of elevation gain and 26 feet of elevation decrease. Or if you go down the route as was proposed by our consultant team, all the way down 4th to Westmoreland, it's only 13 feet of elevation gain and 0 feet of elevation drop. So it's a pretty substantially flatter route than all of the other available options through that neighborhood. Just as a point of comparison, a sort of standard flat roof 2-story building is about 26 feet tall, 3-story building 35 feet tall, 4-story building 45 feet tall, 5-story building 55 feet tall. So when you get to 66 and 49 feet of elevation change, that is like biking up a 4-story building and back down again, which gets pretty dramatic. The second question, one question, can you go back to the map of the route again, just so people can look at that while we're discussing. But next question is, has there been a traffic study? How will traffic impact the Sharrows?
No, there hasn't been a traffic study. I think the idea is that these are low volume, low speed residential streets. So we feel that it's safer for use of Sharrows along these stretches where we can't implement the shared use path.
Yeah, in addition to that, I've asked our police department to do a traffic count and speed measurement at 3 sites along this route, just to have some point in time estimates. And those are underway right now. So that should give us at least a little bit of a snapshot, knowing that, I think they leave out the traffic count for, I want to say like a week or 10 days at a time. So it gets kind of a full range of hours and weekends. I haven't even told our consulting team that yet, but I'll provide that when we get the results back. It took a little longer than we expected, so I was hoping to have it ready before tonight. From Heather Hahn, we have a question or a comment. Sharrows are better than nothing, but don't really help to improve rider safety from drivers. I've been told get off the road more than once while riding on a Sharrow marked road. We also have another question. Also, for anyone who wants to talk through their answer or follow up to questions, raise your hand and I'm happy to unmute you too, but I'll just keep going through the chat until then. From Tony Camilli, we have what % of money to fund this grant will come from city funds versus grants? That's a great question. The 30% designs for this are 0 cost to the city. This is a technical assistance grant from the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. So we are lucky in that we don't have to pay anything. For future levels of design, we'll have to look for other kinds of state and or federal grants. And typically those come with a 20% city match, excuse me. So we're not sure yet what the cost for that would be. And that's part of what our K&K's team is pulling together in their assessment that we'll have at sort of our next milestone. But it's probably evident to see that if the final design continues to lean as heavily on mostly markings and signage, this will probably be a much less expensive leg of the new Ave Bikeway than the other 2 legs so far, which have been much more significant in the way that they engineer the roadway. Then from Sandra, we have a question. Are there speed bumps / humps in the roadway where the Sharrows are proposed?
Andrew, are we aware of any speed humps within the stretch along the alignment for alignment 1?
Yes, there's a couple of speed humps, like for example, here's one, and then I believe the Kansas Lane and Westmoreland, the entire intersection is a speed hump. And
the raised intersection. Okay.
Yep, raised intersection. And then there's a couple of speed humps throughout. There's a speed bump here at Orchard and 4th Avenue. Speed bump here at Cockrell Avenue and 4th Avenue on both sides. Speed bump here mid-block along 4th Avenue between Cockrell and Poplar. And those are the only speed bumps in the project limits are those. But those are existing. Those are not proposed with the Sharrows. Those are already existing speed humps.
Good question, Sandra. Thank you. From Walter again, have you looked at the route at night? How well lit is the route?
So we haven't looked at it in the evening. We haven't been out for a site visit in the evening. But we can certainly work with the city and the community if lighting is desirable. I think, as you know, there's challenges with fitting lighting in the right of way. Sometimes residents don't want more lighting because it can be, dark sky and with other considerations. So I think it's kind of a balance of lighting in the community and intersections, maybe just focusing more on intersections. But again, that can be discussed with the city and the community, and we can certainly accommodate supplemental lighting if needed and where needed.
Yeah, and Walter, this would be a great place for after this presentation tomorrow morning, we're going to be dropping a survey and putting up sort of like campaign style yard signs along this whole route with a QR code to a feedback survey. And that would be a great place to add some extra comments or flesh out that question a little bit if you've been on this route at night and feel like there are opportunities for enhanced lighting along the roadway and in particular locations. And as a note to everybody, we plan to put these signs out tomorrow. It will be raining and very cold, but I felt it was useful to get it out before the weekend. And that will be the most sort of effective and direct way to get feedback. It will also link you to the project page for this project and the designs so that you can have everything in one place as well. Are there any other questions? That was the last one that popped up in the chat so far.
I think Cindy's raising her hand.
Oh, can I not see the hand raise?
No,
I'm
I think
sorry.
she's doing it with the video.
Oh, sorry, I can't see everyone's screens with the screen share, but
Yeah.
let me unmute Cindy, and I'd love to hear your question.
I think I've got it. Thanks. I can't seem to find some of the other buttons. Back to the speed bumps, there are different designs of speed bumps. And so would you be able to look at whether another design for the couple that are in the recommended stretch would be a useful thing to do?
Absolutely. That's a great point. Thank you for that question.
Because the way that the speed bumps in the city are done, some of them are not, many of them, especially on streets with parking, many of them don't lend themselves to easy bike passage. So if you could take a look at that, I'd appreciate it.
Will do.
Thanks. And it seems like I started a trend of people waving their hands around. I don't know why my chat isn't working, but for some reason it isn't all of a sudden.
Yeah,
FYI.
to show, if you can see my screen, to raise your hand, you hit this, how do you raise your hand?
There's a
Oh, that's
little
by the chat
smiley
button.
face at the bottom of your screen that says reactions, and there's a raise hand button.
Okay.
But I did see that Sandra had been raising her hand at the camera for a little bit, so I'll let Sandra go first. Thank you, Cindy, for that note. Let me just find you to unmute real quick, and you should be good to go. Sandra. Oh, wait, hold on. I think you might have to click a button.
I just wanted to say that the chat is disabled, so you cannot add a question.
That is peculiar, but now it is back on, so sorry about that. All right, Ashley, you have a question.
Yes, hi. I apologize because I missed the vast majority of the presentation, so I deeply apologize if I am going over something that you are requesting information about something that you already talked about. But if the focus on the design being primarily sharrows is confusing to me, if the goal of this project is to increase safety along the route. Because my understanding is that there have been multiple studies done that show that protected bike lanes increase safety for all road users. Painted bike lanes don't have like a completely neutral effect on safety, and that sharrows actually make roads more dangerous for users. So I don't understand why we would be spending city money and time on a project that is not going to have a positive effect on safety. And if that's something you discussed already, no need to ruin the rest of the group's evening with that. And I'll just follow up with y'all later, but just something I wanted to get out there in case it hasn't been a discussion point yet.
I think the key is to contextualize where the sharrows and the markings are being placed. And we're talking about, again, low volume, low speed roadways, residential streets, rather than, minor arterials, collectors. That statistic you're mentioning it's more concerning when you're putting unprotected bike lanes and street sharrows on more heavily traveled, higher speed roadways. New at Bikeway on southbound 650, we have, that's where a lot of that protection and those things are really ideal. We're providing sharrows along southbound 650. We have protection from frontage roads because of those high volume, high speed type facilities. So that's sort of I guess that's the onus. I mean, ideally, if we had right of way and space to implement shared use paths continuously through this district connector section for this half mile, we would have done so. So it's sort of trying to strike that balance, I think.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Thanks, Ashley. And again, for sort of additional points of follow-up, like definitely please, for all comments, even if they're said here, I'd encourage everyone to follow the survey that's going up on the route tomorrow. It'll be open for a couple weeks. Give people who bike by and bike through, people who walk their dogs by, people who walk their students to the school bus, because that will be really informative to kind of the next phases of the design. Next up, I have Paul. I believe you should be able to unmute yourself now.
All set. Thank you, Alex. I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Paul Weeda. I'm in the neighborhood here showing the proposal. I'm generally in favor of what's being shown. I just going to share some thoughts, don't necessarily have any questions. I listened to the entire presentation. I thought it was important to, be able to be on time and listen to the full proposal. And as a resident of this neighborhood, I'm generally in favor of the proposal. I live along 4th Avenue. I like the idea of the sharrows. It's low impact. It gets, people through the neighborhood. Looks like, it allows for bicyclists to have a general sense of direction and connect people from New Hampshire Avenue over to Kansas Avenue. I like some of the improvements that were proposed, especially at Kansas and Westmoreland. There is a bus stop at that intersection. I like the idea of the dedicated pathway from New Hampshire over to Poplar and allow for, I guess, it would be general use for both pedestrians and bicyclists. Is that true? Along Poplar Avenue?
Yeah, the shared use path. That's correct.
Okay.
That's
shared use path. Okay. Yeah,
Right.
that's a great idea. Thank you for being thoughtful about that and allowing for that. And then at Poplar and 4th Avenue, that can be a little tricky for anyone entering that intersection, whether you're a pedestrian, a motorist, or a bicyclist. And so I think that should help with that. I think Daryl Braithwaite and I identified a couple of places where there were some street lights out there at that intersection. That's now been resolved with Pepco. So I think everything's pretty well lit at the intersections. We clearly have the newer version of streetlights in the area. And yeah, relocating that pole at Westmoreland and Kansas would be a great benefit because it, clearly obstructs any, pedestrian at that corner. So relocating is a great idea. And anything that can be done to help improve, at Kansas and Eastern, for pedestrians to walk. I use that to get to work when I walk every day to work. And anything that could help improve the corners there on the near side on Takoma Park would be helpful. I mean, there are some improvements over the years, but yeah, and I know that Eastern is being rehabbed, but yeah, anything that can help out in general to make that any safer, I would appreciate that, seeing that as well. So that's my general feedback. I will add comments as a follow-up through this month and ask some of our neighbors to chime in as well.
Thank
And
you, Paul.
yeah, and as Paul explained, kind of his point of view with the project, I think it's worth to kind of mention that Ashley, for this segment of Fourth Avenue, we did look into trying to put in a shared use path through here, but we tried different ways of setting up, and we just found that we really couldn't get it to work without having major impacts, the limited right of way, things like that. I just want to just come back to Ashley and just kind of mention that to you, that we did look into not using the sharrows and putting the shared use path. We kind of found that the best we could do is that some areas there was like 5-foot sidewalk already. And we were seeing like maybe we could gain a foot. So that's why we went with the sharrows through the Fourth Avenue segment.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think also if we had eliminated street parking continuously, we would certainly be able to fit a continuous shared use path. I think that's the challenge. I don't think that would be well received by the community to completely eliminate street parking along one side or the other. I think you could look at maybe eliminating some sporadically, but that's not going to solve your continuous, shared use path connection through this stretch.
Thank you guys for addressing that. Also, Sandra asked a question in the chat about the paving of the shared use path portion. What's that looking like? How is that going to be changed from what's currently there?
So I think for the rest of the new Ave Bikeway sections A and B, we're proposing an asphalt shared use path along there. So right now we're proposing the same. Would be asphalt for the path itself. Now any driveway aprons or pedestrian ramps at the intersections would be concrete, just to make sure we can achieve ADA compliance. That's consistent with, again, new Ave Bikeway section A and B, and also what M.SHA does and other county municipalities in Maryland to ensure ADA compliance will be built at those locations. It's not to say we can't do concrete, but again, we're going with the consistency of what we're doing elsewhere for the bikeway for shared use path. So, thanks.
Rob, for this section along Poplar Avenue, for those new to reading diagrams, it sort of shows that the curb line moves out into the roadway a little bit. Can you speak a little bit to how much extra roadway space is being taken along
Andrew, you want
to accommodate that?
Yeah, let me so what's going on with this curb line is that this curb line, typically when you have a roadway, the two curb lines are parallel. So I want to kind of float over to this sheet to kind of show you what I mean. If you look from the intersection, the curb line matches up pretty well. We're probably about a foot over, but over here, these curb lines aren't parallel. So it does show to kind of go a little bit farther out, and we have the dimensions. But as far as how much we're taking, typically along Poplar, we're only taking about a foot. Really, that's really how much we're taking on a typical basis along Poplar. The existing width from the curb to curb is 26 feet. You can't quite see this is an existing curb line with this dash line. It's just the way it prints. This is an existing curb line, and that's the back of that existing curb right here. And we're moving that out about a foot typically. for along Poplar.
Thank you. We have about 7 minutes left. I see one hand just went up from Callie. I think you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Awesome, thank you. Two quick questions. The first, just to confirm, so after quickly viewing the plans, it looks like there won't be a barrier or separation on that Poplar Avenue section, so the shared use path will just go all the way to the edge. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're getting an 8-foot effective shared use path from the back of curb to the, yeah.
Got it. Thank you. And then just one other question. I know that the plan is to direct cyclists to follow the route along those neighborhood roads. Could you talk a little bit about any consideration for cyclists who might be coming down Poplar? Just looking at the design plan, it looks like that would be kind of a sharp turn for any folks who might be coming from a different direction. Thank you.
Are you referring to wayfinding signage? And if so, that's something that certainly a consideration. We'll we'll look at adding additional wayfinding signage for the other movement you're mentioning. I guess eastbound Poplar to Maryland 650. Let me know if that answers your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Callie. If you need any follow-up clarification, just let us know. Tony, I think you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I just have a question. I am familiar with reading these kinds of schematic drawings and diagrams, but one thing, I'm looking on my iPad, so I don't have the best size screen for this, but can you guys elaborate on the width of the shared use path? Because if I'm seeing this right, I'm seeing either a 6 or an 8. I can't tell.
So we have 8-foot minimum. Is that correct, Andrew? I think it might be a segment or two where we have 9 feet. Typically, it's 8 feet, correct?
I think this is where the confusion is coming from. We have a 1-foot shy line where we're proposing a coping curb. So that I think that may be where you're seeing the 6 from. But that's why we're showing this dimension here, because there's a 1-foot shy line, this proposed type A curb. But typically throughout it is an 8-foot shared use path.
Okay, thank you. So the 6 is not accurate then. It's going to be an 8-foot wide path minimum throughout.
This isn't a 6. This is a 9. It's 9 feet.
Oh, that's a 9. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I was explaining. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But the reason why it's 9 right there is that we have this proposed type A coping that you use along the back. And this already exists. There's already a coping right here. We're just replacing it. If you can kind of see this line here, that's a coping. So with the realignment, we're just putting that coping back in, and we have a 1-foot shy line from the 8-foot path, for bicyclist pedals when they're, riding up against that curb. We left a 1-foot shy line for that.
Okay. So the curb you're talking about, Andrew, you're calling it a coping curb. That's just to make sure we don't chase the curb. Cut it in the slope, right? We're just trying to bridge the gap. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
Limit that that cut line.
Thank you. So is there not enough right of way to have a 10-foot path continuously? Because the guidelines for shared use paths by the National Association of City Transportation Officials is really recommended to be 12, honestly, but 10 in tight spaces.
So this is kind of what we ran into, because I was working through this, and we tried a couple of different things. We tried a 10-foot path. Initially, we tried a 2-foot buffer with the 8-foot path. Now, if you look at the reason why we're able to make this work is because if you look at the back of sidewalk, our shared use path is kind of falling right where that existing back of sidewalk is, right? As soon as we move past that, this limit of where we're cutting into these people's yards and fence lines and things like that, it started to go out pretty significantly. And we just didn't think that was a fair trade-off for what we were gaining. So we went forward with the 8-foot path. And also, if we do go with the 10-foot path, especially when we get to near here, this segment, there's a lot of utilities back here with like the utility pole, water valves, and utility poles. And that was part of the reason why we went with the 8-foot path, because even with this one, with this wall, if we were to try to put a 10-foot shared use path, there's this wall floating back here. And that was another example where we really start kind of cutting into these, making a significant cut into these properties. And we just didn't feel that it was a even trade-off kind of what we were gaining.
Thank you for the explanation. I do see 24 foot of right of way in the roadway, which is pretty sizable amount of space for the cars. Why not push the trail further into the roadway?
Well, considering that this is from New Hampshire Avenue, we feel that 2 12-foot lanes would be appropriate for the vehicles. That's why we held the 24-foot here.
Yeah, I mean, in DC, a lot of roadways now are the recommended width is 10 feet to 11 feet max, you know, depending on space availability. So I would just recommend, Alex, that you guys consider revising this and pushing that trail out to get a 10-foot trail so that it provides ample space for cyclists to not perhaps have a conflict zone with people who are using the shared use path to jog or walk.
Point taken, Anthony. Thank you. I don't disagree. I think there might be an opportunity to narrow the lane, maybe by another foot. I don't think we're going to go much less than 10.5, but just given the proximity to Maryland 650, but I do agree there might be some flexibility there to buy us a little bit more real estate for a little bit wider path. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I just want to note that we're kind of right at the moment when our schedule is to sort of transition us to our next piece of the project. And I want to make sure, because it is a weeknight, that we're not keeping people too late. So I will throw out the remaining questions that are in the queue and note that we have one hand up. And then after that, I'm going to transition us to the next portion of this presentation. So anyone with follow-up questions, feel free to email me. My information is all over the place, but I'll drop it in the chat as well, just to make sure that you can access that. And then I'll get some, I'll either relay it on to our team or follow up with you directly. So in the chat, we have, is there currently or will there be button controller crossing at Eastern Avenue from Kansas Lane to Kansas Ave? And likewise, will there be button control crossing for New Ave at Poplar/Ray?
So Eastern and Kansas, I believe that's district DOT jurisdiction. So I think I won't speak for the city, but I think that's going to be an issue with district DOT. And I think they're upgrading Eastern Avenue. They're working on plans to, my understanding is plans to upgrade Eastern Avenue too, to make it some streetscape and multimodal improvements as well. So I imagine they would be addressing that with those improvements, but I would defer to Alex and Daryl if they have any other insight on that. So
that's correct to the best of my knowledge. DDOT is planning a full Eastern Avenue revamp. I believe it's in their FY26 capital budget. We're following along with that once it gets moving a little faster, because the designs are complete. They just need to build it. Then the final word will go to our last hand raised, Cindy.
Thank you. Didn't mean it to be that way. Couple of
happens.
on the Poplar Avenue stretch. I think you said that you were going to consult with the police chief about some of the traffic. You might find that Poplar is not as busy as you might think compared to some of the other access points to New Hampshire Avenue. I don't know that for a fact, but he would know how to answer that question, whether you really need the full width or not, given the traffic load on that road. And the other thing is in looking for future sources of funding, just to keep in mind, Alex, whether there's some minimum below which you go and then organizations don't want to fund it because it's too skinny. I don't know if that's an issue, but I just want to flag it, and you all can kick that around. Don't want to design something that we then can't get funded.
Yes.
That's it. Thank you. I love this, and I think it's going to be a real asset. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.
Hey, Alex, I don't think we answered the other question about Ray Road and.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're so right.
So just to be, so I think the question was about Poplar and 650 and push buttons. So we are proposing some signal modifications, including push buttons at that intersection as part of the New Hampshire Ave Section B improvement project. So that should be addressed. I believe that should be addressed with that improvement. We're just extending essentially that sidewalk there. And I think Andrew's shown it in our plans, the proposed
Yes.
improvement at that
Yep,
northwest corner right
I'm
now.
showing it as gray.
Yeah.
Yeah, this
I think that-
is the proposed work. Yep.
Let me know if that answers your question.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Just two comments that were in the chat, and then I'll ask that we move on to our next section. But from Ashley, sort of reiteration of yes, especially as there isn't parking on the street, that seems like we could easily gain some space for shared path from the roadway. Thank you, Tony, for bringing that up. And from Paul, there's lots of off-street parkers on Poplar and New Hampshire. Lots of cut-through traffic there to Kansas. So thank you, everybody who joined for this portion of the presentation. I won't ask that everyone stay or feel obliged to stay if you're not as interested in the next half, which will focus on the Metropolitan Branch Trail upgrade, although of course I hope that you will. The format is going to be functionally the same, where we're going to go through a quick presentation, and I'm not even going to spend any extra time on how to get into your interpretation rooms, because we haven't had a flood of new people join us, so that makes that easy and shaves a little time. So Andrew and Rob, do you want to switch presentations and start in on our next half?
Okay.
Sounds good.
I'll pull it up.
While that's getting pulled up, just as a little context for anyone who might be newer to this project, the second half of this grant that we received, this technical assistance grant, so again, no cost to the city, but we put forward the upgrading of the piece of the Metropolitan Branch Trail that the city manages. It's about a half-mile long, and on both ends of it, to Silver Spring, Montgomery County, and DC are building out their stretches of the path to sort of a higher current standard of trail design. And ours, while being trailblazing, and that it was one of the first pieces of the Metropolitan Branch Trail, which eventually will connect from Union Station all the way up to Silver Spring. It was one of the first, and it hasn't been significantly modified since then. So it's now becoming one of the weakest links. And we are interested in keeping it up with the times and bringing it to the new standards that we have in bike path technology. So I'm going to pass it over again to Rob and Andrew, and they will take us into what they are thinking.
Thanks, Alex. And just for everyone's benefit, just joining us, I'll go back through introductions. So good evening, everyone. Rob Gillespie with RK&K, consultant project manager. I'll be presenting this evening with my lead engineer, Andrew Aguilar. And this is for the City of Takoma Park's draft 30% design of the Metropolitan Branch Trail Upgrades project. As Alex had mentioned, again, 30% design is funded through an MWCOG Transportation Land Use Connections grant. The project limits are about a half mile, and it's the City of Takoma Park's maintained section of the Met Branch Trail. That runs adjacent to the west side of Takoma Avenue and Fenton Street from the DC line to just south of the New York Avenue intersection, to the north, just outside of Silver Spring. So most of this trail segment runs parallel to WMATA's Metro Red Line as well. Project goals for the trail upgrades: upgrade that half-mile section, improve safety and comfort for pedestrians and cyclists that use the trail. We want to minimize tree impacts while doing so. And we want to implement the trail improvements while avoiding impacts to property and utilities. And we will also identify stormwater management requirements and opportunities for stormwater management treatment within the project limits. Now, the design team collaborated with project stakeholders, including city planning, city public works, city maintenance, and the public, WMATA, Montgomery Ride-On, and Montgomery College to develop our draft 30% plans. Our 30% design approach is to reconstruct the existing trail essentially on the same alignment with enhancements that focus on user safety, sustainability, and maintaining tree canopy. That would include a 10-foot wide minimum or 10-foot wide typical section or width rather, sorry, for the path. Maintain buffer separation between the trail and the roadway, and using sustainable, flexible porous paving, similar to what DCDOT just did at the southern limit. We're also looking at raising the trail elevation about 3 inches to reduce heaving from tree roots and save trees, and that also will help reduce city maintenance requirements to maintain the trail. We want to avoid impacts to utilities and right of way. As I mentioned, that includes avoiding impacts to WMATA's Metro Red Line, their existing fence, and retaining walls. We want to install continuous lighting for the trail and including at intersections. We're also proposing ADA compliance upgrades for pedestrian ramps and bus stops. So we also propose to improve safety and connectivity to the trail, sidewalk network, and to Bell Ziegler Park at the Takoma Avenue and Buffalo Ave intersection. Some of the improvements that we're proposing there include eliminating that mid-block crosswalk that's shown in that photo, bottom left. It's about 120 feet south of the intersection. We would construct curb return extensions at the intersection to shorten pedestrian crossing lengths and also encourage traffic calming. We'd also relocate those 2 bus stops for northbound and southbound closer to the intersection, basically right at the intersection. And we would assess installation of stop signs to create an always stop controlled condition. And the good news is that we are not proposing any impacts to right of way, utilities, or street parking for these trail upgrades. Tree impacts will need to be fully assessed during the next phase of design because we're going to need to complete a thorough inventory and condition assessment of all trees. We'll work with the city arborist as well to assess those impacts. But as I mentioned earlier, raising that profile 3 inches for the trail and using a flexible material will help to minimize those tree impacts. So additional considerations for the trail include installing bike racks, benches, wayfinding signage, and lighting consistent with the city's streetscape manual. So to summarize our steps that we've completed and where we're headed, the design team performs a field visit with agency stakeholders to review project constraints and concerns. And Alex led a public informational meeting, field walk, back in December. And comments were collected as well and considered for preparation of these draft plans. So we'll collect additional community comments received tonight and subsequent to this meeting for consideration in finalizing those 30% design plans. Our 30% design scope will conclude with a presentation to City Council in May, and that wraps up our scope for this project. So again, those next steps are right here. Collect community comments this evening. Appreciate your feedback in advance and comments, and we'll finalize the 30% design and conclude with a presentation to City Council. And additional funding will be pursued by the city, most likely through cost sharing to complete semi-final and final designs. And now I'd like to turn it over to Andrew to walk us through the 30% plans, and we'll conclude with Q&A. Happy to answer any questions y'all have at the end. Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. Once again, my name is Andrew Aguilar, for those who weren't already on the call, and I'll be presenting the improvements in plan view for the project. I look forward to sharing these with everyone. Once I'm done going through the plan sheets, we're going to open the floor for questions. So the project begins at the District of Columbia, Maryland right-of-way line. This doesn't quite show it perfectly, but what we're doing is the existing flexible paving that is here, we're going to just meet that joint and just continue the flexible paving throughout the project. As Rob mentioned, one of the goals that we had with this project was maintaining that existing horizontal alignment. And what we did was that front edge of the shared use path, as you can kind of see, there's a gray line in the back. It's not going to be perfect because it's survey, but we're pretty much following that front of the shared use path and holding that line to limit the impacts to these streetscape trees. So by doing a combination of holding that line, using that rubber sidewalk porous material, which is good for the trees, and then the big fix is with the tree root heaving. By raising that profile, you can't see this in plan view, but throughout the project, we're raising that profile 3 inches to help alleviate that tree heaving issue that we're running into, that we observe in the project. And I'll just start to work my way north through the sheets. It's a total of 6 sheets, and I'm just going to walk through the project for everybody. The entire limits of the project is a 10-foot shared use path. However, the existing conditions isn't 10 feet throughout. So that's one of the improvements that we're trying to incorporate. For example, this segment here where the railing is, you can see the path is narrower than 10 feet. This is the existing backup path right here. You can kind of see it. It's within that 10-foot line. And that's one of the main improvements. And here goes the Buffalo Avenue intersection improvement. When we spoke to the city, they discussed that the Bill Ziegler Park, they wanted to have a more direct access route. So they wanted to move this crossing from here to the intersection. And as Rob also said, we're going to make this a stop controlled intersection. And the bus stops that are located here and near this crossing, we're going to move the bus stop on this side and adjacent to the ramp for the crossing. This is the location of the other bus stop. We also are proposing lighting throughout the project and typically 60-foot spacing. So these cells you see here throughout the limits, those are proposed lights that we're going to have along the trail. Another benefit with this improvement that the city wanted as far as Buffalo Avenue is that we have this bump out to make this a shorter crossing as well. And then working our way to the other end of the project, the project continues and follows the same alignment where it have the typical 10-foot width, and we're holding that 10-foot path throughout. As just to kind of bring to your attention again, the main improvement here that you can't really see in the plan view is that we raised that profile by 3 inches to alleviate the tree heaving. So you can't see it, but we have a proposed profile that is helping with that issue. And then working our way through the project, we continue to hold that 10-foot path. And this area here, this is the first part where we had to taper the path by 1 foot towards the roadway. It's still a 10-foot path, but the reason why we tapered it 1 foot towards the roadway is that this fill line, this fill that we would have had to do on the other side of the trail, by coming in 1 foot, we were able to avoid impacting this fence and having to do having major impacts by pulling this in by 1 foot. But once we get past, just past this concrete apron, there's another taper and the trail follows the existing alignment again, and it continues throughout 10 feet path. And it continues to go, and the path terminates at the existing concrete bike rack pad. With that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Andrew. A couple questions came into the chat while you were presenting. The first of which was just a comment. It may be worth mentioning that this section has a heavier than normal pedestrian usage of commuters to the Takoma Park Silver Spring campus from the Takoma Park Metro Station, which is a good point, Mark. And Sandra also comments, then adds a question. I was working in Montgomery College at the time of design and installation of this MBT segment. There were many contentious meetings with neighbors about the materials recommended for the trail, fencing, etc. Do you anticipate similar pushback for this upgrade project? I can tackle that one. That's a great question, Sandra. I have been preparing myself for that, knowing and hearing stories about how contentious the early path development was. To date, I have not received any commentary from neighbors immediately adjacent to the path. For this meeting, as I did also over for the district connector new bikeway section, I flyered every house in the neighborhood, door to door, letting people know that this meeting was happening with contact information, follow-up options, and I haven't heard anything back yet. In addition to our sort of digital outreach. My suspicion is that because the trail is already here and we're not dramatically changing the footprint, that people are now used to it as a really great public amenity, and to fight a refurbishment of it maybe doesn't feel quite as high stake, is my guess. Thank you for your questions and comments both. First up with their hand raised, I see Tony. I think you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much. These upgrades look great, fantastic, especially the lighting upgrades, because I've ridden that stretched at nighttime and it is. My question is regarding the proposed bus stops. Hello?
We can hear you, but it sounds really like staticky.
Sorry, my AirPods just died on me.
Oh.
Can you hear me still though?
Yes, we can hear you.
If I heard correctly, are you proposing putting a bus stop on the trail itself?
So there's two existing bus stops today. One is essentially on the trail today. That's the one right where the mid-block crossing is shown there. If Andrew, you want to hover over where the existing mid-block crossing is, where it says ramp. I think just to the west, there's an existing stop there. It's really just a sign, and where folks are supposed to stand. It's really not ADA compliant. To do an upgrade, we would essentially construct a concrete pad for folks to stand there. So yes, we are proposing it as part of the trail, integral to the trail, just for lack of space and to provide that amenity for the southbound bus stop we're talking about.
It's worth noting too, Tony, that that's a extremely low volume bus stop. I think the traffic data we have most recently is that there's an average of like 1 or 2 people using it on a daily basis.
Well, you also you just sort of answered the question. I didn't even know there was a current southbound bus stop there. So I was in the impression you were moving a bus stop from the north, from the other side of the road to the trail side. But it sounds like you're just moving an existing one to a better location.
Yeah,
Correct.
Tony. So the survey didn't quite pick up the line, but there's like a small pad right here between the trail and the back of curb, right here next to this sign, and that's the one that we're going to be moving over here next to the ramp.
Okay, great. Also, so one other question was regarding, if I heard you correctly, there's a proposed stop sign here at that particular spot.
So yeah, we're proposing stop controlled for both the northbound and southbound directions along Takoma Avenue. Now, that's subject to warrants. I think sight distance might be a justifiable reason to put the stop signs there. But right now we'd have to look at that and talk to the city. But right now we're proposing that. We did some similar installations of new stop signs along Flower Avenue too for those same reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. For if you guys are thinking of a stop sign, I would say, Alex, give this some thought because it's getting harder and harder to leave Takoma Park these days. Every single road in and out is just littered with stop signs, and if this is a very low volume bus stop to begin with, it sort of begs the question, why put a stop sign here if we're not going to have if it's not like a place where pedestrians are regularly crossing, or we have a traffic issue. I know we just got new stop signs. We're at the intersection of Ethan Allen and Elm and Carroll and Lincoln, and those have some justifiable, thoughts behind why we needed that. But at this particular spot, I do question the need to build a stop sign there, to add another. This is a very heavily traveled road. If you haven't done traffic count, I'm pretty confident in saying that you would find traffic counts to be higher than you would anticipate. It's a very heavily traveled road because everyone has to go this way to go to Silver Spring, and lots of us go to Silver Spring. So I'd say, Alex, keep that in mind, and just be, if you're going to pursue a stop sign there, I would recommend you consider a traffic analysis.
Well, thank you. We'll look into that more thoroughly. In sort
Otherwise,
of
I
the
love the upgrades, and I ride that trail a lot, Alex. As you know, I tell you all the time how awful it's been lately, but I love especially the lighting upgrades. I think that's going to make it fantastic. You can use it more, especially during the summertime. You can use it at night, and raising it will make it more compatible with the trees that are there. So great work, Jack. Great work, guys.
well, thank you, Tony. One note I'll add to why this intersection was also pointed out on our staff walkthrough, and the crosswalk switch to this corner of the street instead of sort of a ways down the block there, was because this is the access point to Bell Ziegler Park as well. And the only other crossing between here and Albany and Tacoma is, well, these are the only two. There's the whole length of the park. There are no other access points to the trail. So a little extra context for why this reconfiguration happened as it did. Mike, I think your hand was up next, so you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks to Andrew and Robert. I think this looks great. I'll just mention I ride this route 2 times a day, every day to work, and so I'm so grateful that the city and RKK is sort of spending the time to do the upgrades. I had just one question on the width. Andrew, can you just share with us, is the width of the trail growing? Is it currently 10 feet, or is it going to be expanding to 10 feet?
So that question, to kind of summarize it, typically the trail is 10 feet. What we found was that near this southern limit, it's 10 feet, right? As you approach this existing wooden railing, and you can kind of see this in the field, it narrows. You can kind of see this. Do you see this kind of gray line? That's where that
Sure.
existing shared use path is, and we're going back here, and we're proposing a proposed type A curb to limit us going into this slope, because you can kind of see with the contours, they narrowed it like this because I think they didn't want to chase this slope. But with this 8-inch curve that we're putting in here, we can put in a 10-foot shared use path, limit cutting into that slope. Now, aside from that, once you get north of that segment with the wooden railing, it does start to be 10 feet, 10 feet from there, and from there it's pretty much 10 feet, 9.5, 10 feet. And then there's another small segment in here where we were measuring, it was just a little less than 10 feet, but once you start approaching Silver Spring again, all of this is 10 feet. Typically, it is a 10-foot path for the most part, aside from those specific areas I mentioned.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So I joined Alex on the walkthrough that we did on this, I don't know, a couple months ago, I guess. And the one comment that came up over and over again, Alex, you recall this, is just, if to the extent we can, making that path as wide as possible, 11 or 12 feet if feasible. And I'll just mention, as like an N of one, riding home at night when there's people either biking in the opposite direction or walking in the opposite direction. 10 feet sounds wide, but it actually can get quite tight when there's two folks passing by. And so I know there's like foliage buffer between the path and the metro fence. And so, if there's feasibility, I would just ask, the city to try to kind of go as possible, just sort of from like the perspective of this being kind of like, the bike highway into and out of the city, right? I mean, that's what folks are going to be using this for, and to connect up to the purple line. So that would just be my one sort of request. And then my other comment I'll just make is, Andrew, if you go sort of south a little bit, there's one hook in the trail that I'll just, to the next one, and maybe one more actually.
Is this the area you're looking at?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of elevation change between the path and the road, and so I don't know if it's feasible for the city to consider like a fence or some kind of way to just buffer that drop off.
Yeah. So with regard, we saw that too, and we saw that in the field, and we also looked at the survey and took a closer look at that, and it did look really steep. It did. However, we've checked the standards for this slope here, and it checks out. It doesn't. We looked to where a railing was warranted. I actually didn't mention this, but for example, on this side of the path, you can see there's an existing fence, right? Do you see this gray X?
Sure.
There's an existing railing. And for example, here, this is an example of where the existing fence stops there, but we're proposing the existing railing beyond that, because if there's a certain height of a drop off, it warrants that railing. So we did do an analysis of that throughout. And surprisingly, I was surprised myself. I think as we refined the design more, I may even check it twice, but this did not warrant a railing, as steep as it seems, because I've seen it in person too, but this did not warrant the railing. So we'll take a second. We'll verify, take a second triple look, and just make sure that that's the case, though. But this first iteration, that it didn't warrant it.
But I mean, I'm so grateful. I mean, everything looks awesome. So glad that the city's going to focus on this. And my only sort of driving comment is wider if possible. So that's it. Thanks.
I appreciate that, Michael. And I will add that, the 12 foot certainly possible. I think the trade-off is clearly the street trees that border the back of the, that border the road. So if the city is amenable to eliminating some of those street trees, we can eat into that buffer for sure, and get that 12 foot effective. I think, widening towards the WMATA property is going to be a little bit more challenging, because we do not want to, again, affect those, get into their right of way, get into that fence and those retaining walls that abut their property. So it's a lot easier to, I think, encroach on the road and get that path. But again, it's sort of that balance between a 12 foot effective and then still trying to provide a buffer between the road and the effective path. So it's that balance. But we can certainly take another look and talk with the city about that. So thank you for pointing that out. And I saw some others chiming in too, that they're supportive of the widest path possible, and don't disagree with you. Certainly understand that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. The last question we have right now in the chat is from Ashley. You mentioned curb bump outs to decrease pedestrian crossing distances. Would the bus stops be a good location for one of those to provide even more space for the bus stop and MBT to share? I think, Andrew, if I may jump in there, that the mention of the bump outs was along Buffalo Avenue is where the existing proposed bump outs are. But did your team look at whether there's any room to narrow Takoma Avenue at all, or is that infeasible?
Yeah, I think that I don't really think that narrowing Tacoma is an option. I think we're measuring like 10-foot effective travel lanes, or like even less than that. With the gutter pan, we're measuring like 10.5 feet. I don't really think that we're gonna want to. I mean, I'll let Rob kind of chime in on this, but I think that's kind of where we stand with regards to narrowing Tacoma Avenue. The bump out is more so for the crossing across Buffalo, and the bump out goes into Buffalo. The bump out doesn't impact Tacoma that we're proposing.
Yeah, I agree with that, Andrew. I don't think we want to go any less than 10-foot lanes through here. Consideration given to the bus traffic, even if it is very limited, I think that's another consideration, but 10-foot seems to be the narrowest we want to go on this type of roadway where there's bus traffic, so.
Cool. Thank you both. And thank you, Ashley, for the question.
Yep.
We're about 12 minutes from the end of our evening. Are there other questions, comments, wishes, dreams that folks have about the Net Branch Trail? We just got another note in the chat from Callie. Agreeing with calls for widening, I encourage you to plan for expected future use of the trail, especially once the trail is complete between Silver Spring and DC with connections to the Capitol Crescent Trail. This could be even busier than current usage, which is a great point. And not to be contrary, but if 10.5-foot travel lanes are sufficient for Takoma Avenue, surely that would work for much less heavily trafficked Poplar Avenue. Touche. We'll definitely look into, go back and look at Poplar Avenue again. Well, I think it feels like most of the questions have wrapped up. So I want to say thank you so much to everyone who joined, especially those who joined for the full hour-and-a-half of this presentation. I hope I can give you 10 minutes of your evening back. And again, I'm just deeply grateful for everyone who has taken time before this, took time tonight, and for your future time given toward contributing to these projects. Your comments and feedback really do push us to make better projects, and I'm really grateful for that. So the follow-up on this, we will also be putting out yard sign style surveys along the route tomorrow. So next time you're out on the trail, keep an eye out. Also, if you see them getting vandalized or stolen, please let me know. We'll have a few extra to put out instead. But that will be a really useful place to add feedback on the trail, and please encourage your neighbors, friends, colleagues, other people who use these pieces of infrastructure to share their thoughts. So all of this will be posted online, if not tomorrow, on Monday. And I will ask the folks from both the interpreters and the other city staff who have been helping with recordings to stay on for now. But for everybody else, have a great night, and we'll see you later.